All right, we're going to get started here and let people trickle in as we get going. Happy New Year, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this first day of work for many folks. My name is Justin. I am a community development officer with the community development side of Alberta culture, multiculturalism, and status of women. I'll be one of your hosts today. I'm joined by my colleagues, Leah, who you'll hear from in just a few minutes, and Phil, who is supporting the technology side of our webinar today. Welcome to the second of three of the Pivot Online webinars. Today, we're going to be talking about success in the digital world and exploring ideas like live streaming and social media and so on. But before we begin, we'd just like to take a moment to recognize that this is the homeland of many diverse people in Alberta, including First Nations and the Métis people whose ancestors have walked this land since time immemorial. We're incredibly grateful to work, live, and learn on this traditional territory. Before we start talking about the toolkit and hearing from our guests, we do have a brief message from the Honorable Minister of Culture, Multiculturalism, and Status of Women that we'd like to share with you.
Welcome, everyone. I am beyond thrilled to introduce this webinar. The COVID-19 pandemic brought about unprecedented challenges, but with those challenges came some really unique opportunities. We have seen many phenomenal examples of how artists and nonprofits pivoted their work online. Even before the pandemic, technology had been changing, and the way we do business. It's been happening for decades, but the pandemic has shown why it's so important that we learn to adapt in this new world. Change is never easy. That is why we developed a Pivot Online, a toolkit for artists and nonprofit organizations to help you work remotely and extend your reach in the digital age. I trust you will find this webinar and toolkit helpful and will learn some really useful tips that will help you reach your goals. And with that, I'm so happy to turn this over to our webinar hosts. Thank you.
So some key facts for you today. The Alberta nonprofit sector is a bigger economic driver than technology, restaurant, and retail trade, with more than 26,000 nonprofits employing 280,000 Albertans, and it generates more than $5.5 billion in GDP annually. Alberta's visual and applied arts and live performance industries generate $1.3 billion in GDP and nearly 20,000 jobs annually alone. Really, the purpose of this webinar is to provide an overview of the toolkit, demonstrate some of the tools within, and share the insights learned from artists and organizations who have pivoted their work online, and provide information, resources, and inspiration to help artists and nonprofit organizations pivot some or all of their operations online. Some of the session principles. The information presented at this webinar is definitely geared at an introductory level. With that being said, the information presented, as well as the related materials, are not intended to constitute legal advice, the rendering of legal concepts, consulting, or professional services of any kind. We simply want to share information with you that we think will be helpful as you navigate yourself or your organization through its online journey. For your own individual or organization specific questions or situations related to the materials, we really encourage you to seek advice from professionals in that specific area. If you have any questions or thoughts throughout the webinar, we encourage you to use the Q&A or the question and answer function, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And we'll try our best to get as many as we can within the time frame that we have. If you don't have that functionality, feel free to use the chat box feature as well, and it will connect you to the hosts today. We'll be recording this session as well, and you'll receive a link in your email when the recording's available. And you could feel free to share that with anybody or organizations that you think this will be beneficial. You could also find more resources on alberta.ca under Alberta's nonprofit and voluntary sector. For the agenda for today, we will talk about the toolkit and Phil hopefully has the link in that he can put in the chat box. If you haven't seen the toolkit, you may have seen it already in your email that was sent. And there is also a French version that's been completed as well. If you have any Francophone speakers or your organization works with those who speak French. We also have live closed captioning available for the webinar. So if you want to enable that, just hover your mouse over the bottom of the Zoom screen and you can click on the closed caption button and click show subtitle. And in the same area, you can change the appearance of the subtitles by clicking subtitle setting and then using the slider. Before we move into the toolkit and before we hear from our guests, we just wanted to ask the following question through the poll functioning. So Phil, if you can put up the poll, that would be great. The question is, how have you pivoted online during this pandemic period? And some of the choices you have there: moved some or all of your operations to a remote operations. Maybe you ramped up your social media presence. Maybe you moved some or all of your programs and services specifically online. And maybe you've done none of that. So we'll give you a couple of seconds to answer that. We see that so far most folks have really split their time between the top three areas here. Okay, Phil, you can end the poll there and maybe share the results. So many of you, again, this is not uncommon for our even in our first pivot online, that there's definitely many individuals and organizations who shifted their operations in some form or the other online, whether it's social media, specific programs, or maybe the way their organization does many of the things. So hopefully a lot of the tools that we can share today can support some of that work. So before we move on into speaking with our guest here, we just want to talk a little bit about the Pivot Online Toolkit itself. Amongst the struggles within COVID-19 pandemic, there came many phenomenal examples and insights of how artists and nonprofit organizations have pivoted their work online. So Albertans and organizations have integrated changes to how we work, collaborate, learn, as well as shop as the new norm. Technical and digital engagement will continue to be seen as complementary to in-person experiences, and some organizations continue to deliver certain services online and in a very different way. Really, the toolkit captures and shares the insights learned from artists and organizations who have pivoted their work online, and provides information, resources, as well as inspiration to help artists and organizations pivot some of their operations or all of their operations online. It should be noted that the toolkit really provides basic information on the variety of options that individuals and organizations have taken. The guide is not exhaustive, but we'll try to regularly update it to reflect the most accurate information available. Really, the audience for the toolkit is for artists, arts organizations, as well as the broader nonprofit sector. As you pivot online, you may find yourself using a variety of tools and software for online engagement. Keep in mind to reduce your risks, make informed decisions, and ensure that your rights are protected. It's important to review the company's terms of service, privacy policies, as well as security policies. Consider the company's policies around intellectual property and ownership, copyright, dispute resolution, consumer protection, and more. If you are an organization, you may have some internal policies that govern your own risk management plans. So make sure you take a look at this, as well as find alignment between what you're using, as well as your organization's goals. Finally, we don't endorse or recommend any of these policies directly. They're just options for you as an individual or organization to explore. So if you've had a chance to take a look at our Pivot Online Toolkit, really it's broken up into three sections that's right in front of you. Success in a digital world is the largest section. And like the table states, it provides information and resources to help you consider your options to pivot your work online. This section also includes the top considerations that your organization may want to consider before pivoting online, from ramping up your social media to live streaming, maybe selling online. This section really has you covered. Part two provides really a list of supports that are currently available to help artists and nonprofits pivot their operations online. This support could be in the form of financial help, maybe expertise and skills, digital tools, and other community resources. And then the last section really was developed to help leave things on an inspirational note. It never hurts to have more examples to emulate, especially if those examples are from organizations or individuals that are pivoting and doing well within their own communities. The examples range from providing virtual programming and services, live streaming, concerts, or running an online storefront. So speaking of pivoting with an impact, we're excited to hear about some success stories through our special guests and local Alberta artist, Josiah Sinanan. Um, so Josiah is a musical artist and he's a podcast host based out of Calgary. He currently hosts a podcast called Anti-Culture, exploring the concept of culture in the Western world. The show is in its third season, I believe, and he's also a member of the Alberta Podcast Network. He's also the digital lead for Arcade Studios, a digital forward creative agency specializing in content, social media, marketing, and digital advertising located in Calgary. We're excited to have Josiah here with us to share his knowledge and expertise. So everybody, welcome Josiah to the webinar.
Hi, thanks for having me, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
Great.
I'm excited to share some tips.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you here, Josiah. And so tell us about what you do in the area of arts.
Yeah, so I do a couple things in the area of arts, and actually it's great that you guys are hosting this webinar, as I do have some experience with nonprofit, but also working in the social media industry. So me, myself, kind of on the art side of things, is the main pillar is that podcast that I host called Anti-Culture. And that's exploring, as you mentioned, the concept of culture. And we do a lot of focus on what's happening here in Alberta and what people's experiences are culturally in Alberta. So we like to frame that in a podcast format. And that's running on its fourth season now. We're just in the middle of season 4. And beyond that, I also am a musician. So I do some live performances, and I'm just recently working on some new music, which I have launched last month.
Awesome. And we do have Josiah's social media handles up there, so give him a follow as well if you want to have more information about the many areas in the arts world that he's a part of. So in this current time, it's definitely affected your ability maybe to promote or show your work. What have you been doing during this time to be able to promote some of yourself?
Yeah, it definitely has been a difficult time for a lot of people. And I think in arts, we definitely have a foot up because nowadays I find that a lot of people are discovering new art online, especially with the increased free time that we've all had with COVID. So it's a great opportunity to pivot what you're promoting. And for me, it was a little bit of doing a lot of the same strategies that I was before, but kind of pushing the pedal down a little further. And that is, it's been easy in that way, I guess, because I'm doing a lot of the same strategies, but having something like a podcast, which is accessible through online means for the most part, has helped that situation for myself. Music, I'd say, was a bit more of a challenge. And there's so much that you run into, I think, as an artist. One is that people are subscribed to and are promoted to on such a regular basis. It's really the challenge of how do you stand out and become personal and authentic to your viewers and people that are consuming your content? And how do you stay relevant? If you're doing something like a podcast, for example, or if you run a nonprofit and there's multiple events happening or multiple donation opportunities, for example, that's something that you want to make sure you're staying on top of, but also not reiterating the same information again and
Mm.
again, in order to keep people engaged. And so I think it's very important to make sure that you're kind of up to date on how people are talking and what people are looking for. For something like my podcast, I definitely try to make sure that I'm active on certain social media platforms more than others, which I can get into a bit later. But a great example of that is being on Twitter has been really helpful for something like a podcast during this time, because people are talking about current events constantly on Twitter, and it's an ongoing conversation. And so there's a great opportunity for you to add your voice in, even as a third-party listener, and that can sometimes bring attention to your page and your projects. But that's just one example. There's a lot going on, of course, and definitely putting that pedal down has been monumental for me.
Yeah, and I like this idea of engagement because I think whether you're an artist or an organization, there's definitely a lot of things that you can do in person to, to know what's happening, or to hear from, feedback from clients, fans, whatever it may be. And in this space, a lot of people are venturing into this online space and, kind of struggling with maybe that engagement piece. Is there anything, just what you've learned, I guess, in the past few months since ramping up maybe all of your work into like this online space? Are there some lessons learned that you've experienced during this time?
Yeah, I think there's a few that come to mind. One thing that comes to mind right off the bat, and this might be hopefully not too advanced, but for people that are just making their foray into the social media world, there over the time of COVID, there has been a lot of promotion for new features on platforms like Instagram and Facebook that are extremely helpful for helping your engagement. And as a little side tip from my full-time job as a social media manager and digital ads lead, oftentimes when there's a platform like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram that has a new feature, whenever you use the new feature, you actually get a bump in the algorithm, which is a free way to help yourself out. And I would just encourage people to experiment with some of those. That's been a big benefit to me over this time. Examples of that would be going live and doing a live stream and planning for that in advance. So if you're planning a live stream, it's kind of a weird feedback loop, I guess, but I would recommend, putting together something so that people have it on their radar, scheduling something out, and then using that feature and kind of making a big splash for yourself in whatever way that looks like. And I think you'll find, the second point I was going to make is I think you'll find a lot of value in the more traditional ways of engaging with your clientele or customers or listeners or whatever by going back to those traditional things. So for example, your email list is going to be very powerful moving into the social media world and moving into the digital world. Those people are engaged. They've maybe made a donation before. They've maybe listened before. You can kind of count on those people to be tuned in. And that's kind of your lowest hanging fruit. You can also do kind of more of the manual work too. If you have a physical mailing list, you can find those people on social and kind of build that audience out for yourself. And there's so many opportunities to reach those people on these new platforms. And you'll be surprised, I think, how many are already engaged on those platforms. And so that's something I would definitely recommend taking advantage of. And I think for me, again, it's that feedback loop is, yes, maybe you have a great email list that you're starting with, and you're not sure if all those people are on social or not, or would even be engaged. And chances are they are. And then the opposite of that is you want to encourage people to go back to those traditional methods that maybe they're more comfortable with. If it's a link on a social post that just says, hey, sign up for my email list so you don't miss what's happening during these times, so you can stay in tune and make sure you're still supporting. You can continue building it, and it kind of feeds into each other. And I would say too, don't underestimate the power of the word of mouth. So just like you'd see something amazing that an organization has done and you want to tell someone about it over coffee, and maybe they go look up the organization. The same thing happens online. So if there's something you're celebrating and you make a post about it online, you never know who's going to share it. And it's become easier than ever to spread news that way. And people consume content a lot quicker that way as well. So there's a benefit there too.
Right. I like that you've kind of said you don't need to abandon some of the other ways that you are engaging with your audience or your stakeholders or whatever else it is. And I think during this time some people felt like, oh, now we have to completely uproot everything that we're doing. But if you have a strong email list, or if you're doing newsletters frequently, like, continue to do that. And I like how you said that
Mm-hmm.
this really builds into kind of other potentially other networks that you're already have been doing as well. I know something like social media, for folks who maybe have not ventured in that space, maybe not on a work kind of level, maybe personally they've had their Facebook or whatever, Twitter and so on. In terms of social media as to promote some of your art or your organization, are there any tips that you can give artists or organizations to help with their social media platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to be fully transparent with everyone too, I definitely had more traction on my personal accounts before I even started the podcast or my music. And just like anyone else starting something new, it always starts from scratch, even if you have a big foundation you're starting from. So I would say, like, number one is don't let that discourage you if you're putting out a project or something that is art based. Sorry, a couple of things came to mind actually when I said that. One thing is that I think it is important to have separate pages for your art and for your projects that you're working on that live apart from your personal page. And kind of the benefit with doing that is that your audience is going to be different based on your personal page. Yes, you'll have a lot of family and friends that come and support you on the other side, but you can actually get a really good sense of who's listening, who's being involved with those external projects that you're working on. And maybe I'll just share some of my pages now and kind of go over what that journey was like.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'll just give you an example with my podcast here, and I'll pull up some of my resources. Okay, so actually we'll start with Instagram here. So this is my podcast Instagram, and my personal page. Over the years, I've done some photography and travel, and also kind of through personal connections. My personal Instagram is quite a bit bigger, has a lot more followers. So I created this page from scratch, and it's slowly growing. I know that not all my listeners are on here because Instagram and podcasts don't always mix as well as something like podcasts and Twitter would mix. But really great opportunity here to kind of build out your brand. So I've had a section where I highlight my guests. I've done things like IGTV, which is like a video format for Instagram. I also have these little clips that I've made, which are quotes from my guests. Sometimes we have still images of quotes from my guests. And then as you scroll, you can kind of see there's these changing moods that I've been able to highlight. So this is kind of season to season. You can see how things have changed and shifted. And over time, I found, especially with this season, which kind of starts around here, as I've gotten more of a plan for my feed and also have stuck to some familiarities that people might be more interested in, I've seen the page definitely grow in its engagement. And of course, we're using features like the highlights up here to highlight each season of the show. And I want to make sure that my links are connected as well. So that's just a quick overview. And then on Twitter, which is kind of where everything is living right now. Actually, let me go here. Twitter is really interesting because there is quite a lot of engaged people. So although the Instagram is still arguably bigger, this is where I have a lot more of my discussions. And Twitter is awesome because there's not really a limit on how much you can tweet. So I actually try to tweet every day if possible, or even just add my voice to a discussion. And a lot of the same things that I'm posting on Instagram can work on Twitter as well. So it's really a no-brainer to be on there. And Twitter's great too because it's pretty driven by hashtags and subject matter. So if you have a Twitter account for whatever you're working on, just using the search bar can really get you involved in some of those conversations that people are having around your platform. And then for Facebook, it's a little bit different because there's a lot more of an older audience on Facebook, but Facebook is a really handy tool to have, especially when you're starting out, because you have access to the ads manager and also the ability to boost your posts, which is something I can get into a little bit later, but that's really helped my listenership as I move forward. Again, you'll see some of the same updates here, but Facebook is really focused on the links that you're sharing, and also visual content. In a little bit different than Instagram, something you might notice on Facebook, that's just kind of a thing that people kind of gloss over, is that on Facebook, your text comes first before your media, whereas on Instagram, you see the media first and then the text. So Facebook does offer a little bit more room for discussion. It also has a very specific demographic that's on Facebook. And because of that, it's a great tool to be able to spread the news about what you're doing. So I have spent a lot of time, and my full-time job is running ads and boosting, and finding that audience that you want to reach is very effective on Facebook. So if you are selecting the audience that you want to reach with your content, boosting is a really great option. And honestly, you just need to do maybe $5 to $10 a post if there's a really important post you want to get out there. And that will actually reach quite a few people. So this one I think I did for $5, which is my first 2 guests, and it reached 675 people. And not those are people that haven't liked my page yet. So that's kind of the power of Facebook. A lot of people say that it's dying, but if that's where you start, Facebook can actually be a really great entry point into social media. So
Great. Yeah.
I also have
Yeah. No, and I think that's a great point to make, because I'm sure there's folks on today who, like, where do I start? Like, where do I, like, should it be Facebook? Should it be Twitter? Should it be Instagram? But understanding the audience and the type of media that you can, put out in these different platforms, whether text-based or, how you said, a lot of the visuals, the aesthetic is different for each, I guess, each platform that you use. And I guess for folks today, getting a sense too of where does your audience live on, will help gauge who you want to attract or who you want that message to be shared. I know you talked about it a little bit, just in terms of, platforms and the ability to monetize and so on. I know that's not necessarily your bread and butter per se, but for artists looking into the areas of monetization or selling work, do you have any experience or advice that you can give in that area?
Yeah, for sure. So I think if you're monetizing, or if you're offering a product to people, or even in the nonprofit example, if you're running a donation campaign, for example, I would say that your foundational platform for those type of activities would be Facebook, because through that boosting opportunity, there's a lot of super easy resources. If you boost something, you can actually choose what the call to action is. So there's that little button at the bottom of Facebook ads, and it will say learn more, or whatever you're looking at. And one of those options, if you are registered as a nonprofit, is donate now. Shop now is another one that you can use, and a lot of people discover brands that way. And as I mentioned, during my full-time job, I do run digital ads for a variety of e-commerce clients. And even people that haven't heard about brands before will make their first purchase through a Facebook ad or Instagram ad. So it's a really powerful tool. You start to see a lot of patterns. You start to collect some data on the people that are looking at your information and your page. And I've also run ad campaigns for nonprofits that have been really successful when they've made the pivot to the digital world. So there's a few opportunities there. I would also say don't shy away from promoting a purchase opportunity every chance you get. So an example for me with my podcasts. Podcasts are pretty famously known to not be monetized very easily. And so it is kind of a labor of love, and that you make that sacrifice as a podcast host. But I have been promoting in the past 2 seasons my Patreon page, for example, which is an opportunity for people to give back and also get something in return through, getting merch or special updates from me. And that's been really successful. And I don't shy away from that. I mention it in most of my podcast episodes, and I just give people that opportunity. And I think on social media, it's all about that, is you're partnering with people. These are people that are excited to see your updates. You're not necessarily fighting tooth and nail to get people interested. These are people that have already caught on. And that's pretty important to remember in your tone. And that actually brings me to another point that I wanted to make too. If you're getting started in the social media world, it might be tempting to just try and buy followers or try to take a fast route to make your page look more established. But I would definitely recommend against doing that for a couple reasons. One, just being in the industry, it actually ends up really hurting the engagement of your page and the visibility of your page as a result. Because say, for example, you have 10,000 followers on your page, or you have 10,000 likes on Facebook, but then when you post something, it only gets 5 likes. That actually will tell Facebook and Instagram that your page is likely fake or has used a bot, and that will be not favored by the algorithm. So you can actually really hurt your brand by doing something like that. And you also lose out on the data of who's actually engaging with your content. So that's a big tip I would definitely say, is it's a slow game at times, but it's always worth it to build from where you're starting. So right now, my podcast is in its 4th season, and I would say I'm still working toward my goal of that 1,000 followers on Instagram, which is something that I'm proud of where we've gone, and I'm proud of the engagement. And as an example, I think I'm around 700 right now, but our engagement rate is at like 6%, which is huge. Typically on Instagram, you would have between 1% and 3% on a normal account. So that's just showing me that the people who are following my page are actually people that want to stay up to date. And for those who don't know too, engagement rate is kind of how they calculate who's responding to your posts. So it's usually based off of how many people a post has reached and what percentage of those people have engaged with the post in some way. Yeah, so sorry if I'm getting too complicated there, but just some thoughts.
No, it's good. And I think, I know it's helpful, for a lot of the organizations we work with, the artists we worked with as well, is that, you just don't go into it. You do have to plan it, like many organizations would have a strategic plan. Your online, your social media is a plan as well. And I think you've said it too, that it's not a, hey, all of a sudden you do this, you're going to get tons of engagement. It is something that you must continually do, and so on. So if there's artists or organizations out there that are, pivoting to an online presence, is there any other advice that you'd like to share for folks in that step?
Yeah, I think one other thing that comes to mind is if you are making the jump into social media a little bit more than you were previously, you want to make sure that that's cross-referenced pretty easily with your website, with your email lists, even with your physical newsletters. You can start promoting those channels both ways. And maybe I'll just quickly show my website to kind of give that example here. Okay, so, oops, it's actually in the edge of the screen here. Okay, so this is my podcast's homepage. And there's a couple opportunities as you scroll through. It's a very simple page. There's just kind of 3 or 4 panels. So we have Learn More, which is our About page, Listen Now, which hosts all our episodes, and Contact Us. And that's really simple. Whatever translates into your industry or company can live wherever that is at the top, kind of the most easy access areas. But then here we do have a feed that connects directly to our Instagram and Twitter. So say for example, someone's on my email list, but they're not following me on one of these platforms, they would recognize that, oh, this is Josiah's Instagram and Twitter, and he's active. He tweeted today, or he posted today, and this is his next guest. And it gives you that opportunity to have that next level of access. And I think that's really what is important as you build out your online presence, is you want to make sure everything that you're promoting is active and gives people an opportunity to join in that way. And then of course we have our mailing list and all our links at the bottom here. So that cross promotion of your social media and your web page is a really simple way to kind of take that step forward and ensure that the people that are engaging are the ones you want to have engaging.
Cool. I know you're sticking around. You're going to talk a little bit more about some of the platforms here, but really appreciate your insight and as well as your experience, not only from I guess the different faces of your artistry, whether it's your podcast, your music, or some of your, your digital social media stuff. So I know you're going to stick around here, and I know people probably have questions here, but we'll continue on here, and then we'll throw it to you in just a sec here. Cool.
Sounds good.
All right. We'll get it to Leah with some other social media insights, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks, Justin. So we wanted to touch base just briefly on some of the features of the toolkit without going into too much detail or kind of reiterating what's already there. But we wanted to talk about just some of the basic things that, social media can accomplish for you, right? There are over 25.3 million Canadians on social media. Yet social media networks may be an underutilized online business asset. Social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram can be highly effective tools to help you and your organization stay connected to your audiences and your stakeholders, or even your clients, depending on the nature of your organization. They're already using them in a lot of cases. So how do we take advantage of that? How do we tie into that and connect with them? So artists and nonprofits can use social media in a variety of ways to help pivot kind of what they do from an in-person, face-to-face experience to an effective online experience. So you might be able to advertise links to your personal website or an online store through social media. You can do photographing and advertising your products and services. So depending on the nature of what you do, there is ways to take what you've always done in person and start to think about using social media to do it online. You can post advertisements. If you're an artist that does commission, maybe you can find a way to promote that you do these commission orders online. Live streaming, I don't know how many of us have attended some form of a live streaming event where we've been able to listen in or watch or participate in some form of a performance or class. You can use it as an amazing tool for notifying folks about upcoming events. We used it to promote these webinars. You can answer customer service inquiries, maintaining customer relationships, just some of that connection that you sometimes need to do with your stakeholders. And of course, you can use it for hosting fundraisers and more. We've seen events such as the Stay-at-Home Gala, which was all done online. So there's ways that you can use these tools to do just about anything in that social media realm. But like anything you do, it is really important that you set some goals and you have a plan for how you're going to actually make this work. And if you're just starting out, maybe your goals are a little bit smaller. Maybe you're just like, you know what, I want to get 10 posts out a week, or maybe it's 5 posts a week, whatever you think is kind of reasonable to get you started. But it's really important that as an organization, you think through some key considerations. Do you want social media to help you sell something? Do you want to increase or diversify your audience? Like, what is the target or the goal you're working towards? Is it about learning more about what your audience wants or likes and dislikes so that you can connect with them better? Are you using it to help you be innovative in your current practice? Are you using it to fulfill a component or an aspect of your mandate? Maybe as part of your organization, you are supposed to be connecting with people and reaching out and having conversations. So are you moving those tools from an in-person experience to online? And are you doing this to see if you can reinvent yourself or try something new and different and just something fresh? Like, you can use social media for any of these things, but it's really important that before you dive too far into it, you're having some internal conversations with yourself, with your organization about, what do I want to do with social media? What is it I'm trying to achieve? And once you've kind of nailed that down, then you can start building out your plan for how you think you can go about doing it. And in addition to setting your goals, there are many other considerations, and a number of these are listed in the toolkit. So again, I don't want to go into too far of a detail on this, but you got to think about, am I doing it to generate more content, or is it just helping me to find ways to connect differently? Some platforms like Facebook have these algorithms that Josiah was mentioning that might suppress content from accounts that publish frequently, but fail to get that connection or feedback and engagement that you're looking for. So content for the sake of content might not be what you necessarily need to strive for. Both your audience and your social media platform want the same thing: content that is interesting, not simply more content. So how do you do this while thinking through, what is the intention behind what I'm posting and what am I trying to achieve with it? So this is where your goals come into play, like we discussed a little bit before. Developing content that's interesting may seem complicated, but it is less so when you know what you want to achieve, what your goal is, and how you are talking to your audience. So when in doubt, ask yourself honestly, what are the things that you enjoy and you engage with online? Because it's pretty likely that if it's something that you would engage with, then others are likely to engage with it. The similarities are definitely there. And sustainability is absolutely fundamental. As with content development, it is more important to select your social media platforms according to your needs and objectives, rather than trying to ensure that you're on everything. And that you've kind of reached into and connect with every possible platform out there, because that would also be overwhelming in terms of just how do you manage all of that. So developing social media content is definitely work, as is monitoring and interacting with other accounts, answering the questions, responding to comments. Be realistic about what your organization's capacity is to maintain these accounts, as they are a boon, so that they are a boon and they actually support the work you're trying to achieve, rather than a drain on your resources. So the answer to the question around how often should I post is often related to your own capacity that allows you to create content and is both highly engaging and fulfills the objectives of your plan. So there is no simple answer to how often you should post. You definitely need to assess your own capacity. You need to see what your goals are around your use of social media. And then you got to figure out how you're going to incorporate that into your day-to-day activities. So as I said, there's a lot more information that you can kind of review on the platform, but I really do want to bring Josiah back in. I mean, he's obviously got a ton of expertise in this area, and just have him maybe share some additional thoughts around, we know social media can be intimidating. We see there's some questions in here on, I'm in one or two sites or platforms, how do I get into the other ones? So I guess my question back to you, Josiah, is what would you say for those who are just starting to expand into more than one platform, or they're really starting to try and figure out how to do this, but they're not sure how to juggle the workload? They're not sure how to manage. It feels like all I'm doing is monitoring my social media accounts and I'm not actually doing my regular job. So what would you say to those who are looking for some insights or some ideas on how to manage all of this?
Yeah, I think you outlined some great points for sure. Is kind of start with where you're comfortable. Don't overwhelm yourself by trying to cover all your bases and be on every single platform. You can slowly build it out. And an example of that is for my podcast, I didn't have an Instagram page for the first season. I decided to do it on the second season because I found that I didn't have a lot of visual content. A lot of it was just audio. And just this year, I just got onto YouTube. So it can be step by step, regardless of what you've done before. So that's kind of my first tip: is take it slow and easy. Maybe start with one platform that you think the majority of your audience would be on. And for a lot of people, that is Facebook. It's kind of the least intimidating. It's the one that's the most familiar to people. And that's a great place to get your feet wet. And in terms of how often you're going to post to and kind of planning ahead, those are great tips. I think for something like Facebook, it really doesn't matter if you're posting every single day, because it might not even be seen every single day by the people who like your page. And that's just unfortunately how Facebook is structured. Something like Twitter, where people get notifications every time you post if they want to, can be very powerful if you're leading a lot of discussions. But there are planning tools, and I would recommend at the beginning, if you're kind of making a jump into a new platform, is really making a plan, pen and paper, and just figuring out what kind of content do I want to share, how much content do I have to share, what's available to you. Do you have a lot of photos you want to share? Do you have the ability to make some graphics? And if so, then you can plan out where those posts will go, even just on a calendar. And from there, I think once you feel prepared, there are some tools online that you can use that schedule out your posts for you. So you could even just spend one afternoon putting everything into a scheduler and then kind of turning the lights off for a little bit, unless you go and check in maybe once a day. I like to check in small 5 to 10 minute increments and just make sure I'm replying to comments and staying engaged and checking in on how the post is performing. But beyond that, it can become quite an easy lift, especially if you're just doing one platform. It should be something that you can kind of keep the lights on for, but not necessarily be planning something out every single day. So yeah, there are some recommendations for tools I can offer as well if people are interested in that, but definitely plan ahead and take it one step at a time.
We definitely have a couple questions in the Q&A here that are kind of tying into this. And I'm sure people would love to hear what some of those schedulers are. I'm not sure. I can't recall if we've actually listed any of them in the toolkit. So if you have some you want to share, that would definitely be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of the be all end all for every social media platform, if you're scheduling Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, if you have a lot going at once, the one I would recommend that is actually Canadian is called Hootsuite. That's HOOTSUITE. I can maybe write these in the chat. That's kind of the one that covers all of it. If you're just doing Instagram, I would recommend another Canadian company called Later. They're really easy to use. You can just drag and drop your photo into a calendar, write your caption, and then you can auto-publish it for that time on your Instagram account. So that one's been really helpful for my podcast and also for other clients that I have at work. And then the fun thing is that if you are on just Facebook or just Twitter, you can actually schedule within Facebook and Twitter if you have a business page. So there's a option before you publish, there's a little arrow next to it, and there's an option to schedule. And you can choose what time that goes live. And honestly, you could just sit there and do a whole week of posts and just make sure you schedule them out based on when you want them to go live. And you can also check your analytics too on platforms like Instagram and see when your audience is the most active. And that's found under insights. So a lot of people post around noon most days, but sometimes if you catch the early morning or after dinner time slot, those are good times during the week as well.
Great, thank you for that insight. It's definitely helpful. And we've got a couple of people who are absolutely in agreement around Hootsuite for sure. There is a couple or one question in here that you might be able to speak to, and it's about how to make your podcast really impactful. What are some of those key factors that you should be considering when you're looking at podcasts to really try and get some meat to it and have that impact that you're trying for?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something I could talk about forever, but something for me with the podcast that I found really helpful is nowadays there are a lot of people that are venturing into that world. And something to consider for sure is to make sure before you start doing anything that you have a really strong premise for your show, that it's pretty niche as much as possible. So maybe it's, what am I cooking this week? And you're going through recipes or something. That's a niche idea that maybe people have done similar things, but something that kind of speaks to who you are and is authentic to you and also isn't too general. You don't want to have a podcast that kind of talks about everything and anything unless you kind of already have a big audience that's looking at you for your voice. I think for me, doing Anti-Culture, for example, was all about how I grew up in Alberta. I was born and raised here. And my dad is a second generation immigrant, but my mom is like a sixth generation Albertan and has, family that owns ranch land. And we've been here for a long time. And so that experience is kind of what Anti-Culture is centered on. That's very personal to me and has brought in a lot of interest. And I think if you want your podcast to have a splash, that's really important. And then just also don't do it alone. I think there's a lot of resources out there that can help you and that want to support you, especially in Alberta. Justin mentioned I'm part of the Alberta Podcast Network, and that's been a great help for boosting my show. And people are interested in what's happening locally. So be proud that you're from Alberta, and I think make space for yourself. There's space for all sorts of podcasts and shows, and yeah, don't be too intimidated by it. There's a lot of steps to take, but I think if you're committed to it and you stick to it, there's a lot of opportunity for growth in that area.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very helpful to kind of get that insight into how do you start and launch that impactful podcast. We do have a question in here around YouTube. And I don't know if you've done much with YouTube, the benefits of having your own channel. And they're just kind of wondering, you know, is there value to having your own personal YouTube channel and kind of using that and promoting through that avenue as well?
Yeah, YouTube is an interesting one because I don't think it necessarily is a necessity for a lot of companies unless you have the content for it or the capacity for it. It is probably the platform that requires the most capacity. You do want to have relatively regular videos, from what I've heard, at least weekly, if you're able to make sure you keep up the algorithm there. And again, that depends on your purpose. If you're wanting to just have a YouTube account so you can host videos and then share them on your social media, but you don't care about your subscribers on YouTube, then use it as a tool and take the YouTube link and share it on your Facebook and Twitter as an easy way for people to see what you're promoting. But again, I don't think it's a necessity, but it is a really handy kind of two-edged sword because you can use it to promote maybe one event that you did and you want to show people how the event went, put it on YouTube and it's super easy for people to watch. On the other hand, if your goals are to build an audience, then that's a whole other ball game, but also can be a really useful tool if you're kind of playing by all the rules and have the capacity to keep up that requirement.
So it's definitely about what are your goals? What's the best tools to help you accomplish that goal? Is it going to meet all of your needs, or is it just another smaller tool in your broader toolkit of things you might be accessing or using? So that's great to kind of consider that. You know, unfortunately, what we're learning as we've done this work on pivoting online, there is no one easy answer. The most common answer, the best answer we've ever been able to give is it depends. It depends on what you're trying to do. It depends on what your goals are. It depends on all of these different factors. So it really is take a couple steps back, think through what is the intention behind this? What am I trying to achieve with this? And then what is the best tool to kind of make that happen?
Exactly.
We have a great question in here that I think if you're open to sharing would give some great insight to folks is, you know, are there any social media mistakes or regrets that you may have made that were really key learning points for you that you're open to sharing so that maybe folks can learn from them?
You know, I think that is a really good question. It's kind of funny to consider because in a lot of ways, there's not a lot of mistakes you can make on social media unless you are adding fuel to a scandal or something, for example. But I think a lot of these platforms are pretty foolproof. There have been many times where I will try to boost a post and it will get rejected because Facebook thinks that I'm talking about something too political or the like, especially with my podcast, I've found that. Or there'll be times where I'll put money behind a boost and I won't get a lot of engagements. And those are kind of the mistakes, I guess, but you always learn from that because, and I think it's pretty intuitive. You can kind of take from that. In the example of the political flag that I got, it actually wasn't a political post, but there was some kind of word I had in there. So I was able to just request a review and go through it again. And there's no danger of getting like whitelisted or something unless you're absolutely promoting something that's against Facebook's policies. You can always try things again. You can always tweak your audiences if something didn't work very well. On my podcast page, there's a lot of posts that I've archived that I don't want to live on my feed anymore because maybe they're not relevant or I didn't like the quality of the imagery or something. But the nice thing is, like, especially if you're not, you know, rushing to buy likes or build a huge platform, you can make mistakes and you can have learnings as you continue to build. And so yeah, hopefully that just removes the barrier for people. I wouldn't be afraid to make mistakes, and if it's something horrible, hopefully someone calls you out on it and you can move on.
Fair enough. There is that sense of risk, and I think for many folks, and we heard it at our first podcast in December, and again now, is there's a feeling of discomfort because I think it's new, it's a little bit unknown. But from your examples and what you've shared, as well as what we've heard, it's you think it through, you do your best with what you have, and you try it, and you learn from it, and you continue. And I
Mhm.
think that's where we're all at with the way we've all had to pivot in terms of moving from mostly in-person based work to this online world, is be willing to try and be willing to learn. And don't be too critical of yourself if it doesn't, fully succeed the first time around. Um,
Exactly.
we do have a couple questions in here that are kind of speaking to some of the new algorithms and how do you keep up with them. One is specific to the new Instagram algorithm, just saying that they're having a hard time kind of navigating this new algorithm. And the other one is just how do you stay on top of these new algorithms and continue to figure out how to work within them. So any thoughts or advice you can offer there?
Yeah, I think it's not very common for people to be staying on top of those because they can shift pretty quickly. But there are a few blogs that I subscribe to that kind of help me stay on top. One of them, actually, that I mentioned earlier is Later, that Instagram scheduling tool. They have a blog that I would definitely recommend subscribing to. And I think their website is just later.com. But they're on top of it for me. So I get an email and it will say, here's what's new about the algorithm in 2021, and I'll give it a quick read. And something that is also worth mentioning is that the algorithms on most of these platforms aren't designed to tie you up or keep you stuck. Um, they're usually just to favor the new features they have more often than not, or they have good intentions behind them. For example, Instagram removing their likes that you can see. It kind of shifted things to make them more authentic. So I think a lot of the big changes that have happened, it depends what you're promoting. So if you have a company and you're promoting a lot of brand forward things, that type of algorithm on Instagram might not benefit you as much. You might need to be boosting more and relying on your boosts. But if you have a personal brand or something like a podcast, or you're an artist, I think that there's a big opportunity to make more of a splash with some of those changes. And it's from things like using their new features and being active on things like your Instagram stories, which give people more opportunity to do things like voting in a poll or writing in a question box. Those all up your engagement, and anything that ups your engagement basically will help any algorithm. So it's kind of about just getting out there in the first place and trying things and being authentic. And I wouldn't stress too much about all the details because things will pick up if they're meant to pick up, and you'll kind of learn as you go. But if you do want to see all the technicalities about it, I would recommend subscribing to something like Later and keeping up with that.
That's great to know that there's somebody already doing the staying on top of things so that you can just, benefit from their wisdom and their knowledge, which is always helpful in this ever-changing world. There's another question, a couple that are a little bit more specific that I'd like to put to you. Feel free to share it, say if you're not quite sure. The one is around, advice for personalizing posts so it doesn't look like you're just copying and pasting the same publication across multiple platforms. Thoughts on personalizing it, or those slight tweaks? Is there benefit value to tweaking it versus, same content across all? So what can you share around that?
Yeah, for a lot of my posts, I do share the same key content. So whether that's the quote that I'm sharing or the image or the video, I try to keep that pretty consistent. An example of where things differ is in your copy. So your tone on Instagram might feel a little bit more personal. You might use some hashtags on Instagram that you're not using on Facebook. Facebook, as I mentioned, is really, you can center your whole post around a link, whereas on Instagram, you can't do that. On Twitter, it's going to have to be within the character count. So each platform does have different rules and tones. And I think I definitely do change posts based on that. I kind of write a core caption usually, and then as I'm in the platforms, I'll retrofit them as I go. And I think it's just something that you develop over time. You kind of get the Twitter lingo and get the Instagram lingo and get the Facebook lingo. But I would say treat Facebook as kind of more of your professional, formal platform. Instagram is a very useful tool, but it's also more fun and it's more focused on the visual element. And then Twitter is very discussion focused. So make sure you're asking people questions, using hashtags that might be relevant. That type of thing is more where you can play for that. But yes, I think tweaking the caption and also the tone is important across platforms. Long answer short.
No, that's very helpful to kind of think through how do you keep it consistent, but also keep it customized. Where is one specific question on how do you actually join the Alberta Podcast Network?
Yeah, I actually got a message today that they are accepting some new podcasts. So if you go to, let me just double check here. Yeah, albertapodcastnetwork.com. There is a link. Let me just see if it's there, what it's called. Yeah, so you can either hit their contact link. Yeah, I think that's how you do it. So albertapodcastnetwork.com and then click their contact link in the top right. And you can get in touch with one of their facilitators, and they have a little bit of an application form. But it's a great community and there's a lot of amazing Alberta podcasts there. So would really recommend. I saw my listens go way up once I joined the network.
Great, that's great. And very helpful to get that kind of direct link. And it's perfect timing in terms of their, looking for some new podcasts to join. There are a couple other questions in here. Some are quite specific. One is having some trouble with Facebook. They boosted 2 workshops and ended up getting charged way more than they were anticipating. And they weren't asked for a budget or anything else when they kind of went in, and now they're trying to see if they can get it fixed with Facebook, but no one is answering them. From your experience, is there another way they can go about contacting someone? Is there a special, kind of backdoor to get someone to actually respond?
Yes, so Facebook is a tricky one to get a hold of, and I deal with this a lot with some of our clients. It kind of depends on your situation. If you have a business account that you're running the boosts from on Facebook's Business Manager, then you can enter a live chat with a Facebook representative. If you just have a page that isn't connected to their Business Manager, and that's getting a little bit complicated, it can be tricky to get a hold of them. So let me just pull up the link here and I can share it in the chat, but there is a support link. And if it's during their business hours, they should be able to help you with that. There is sometimes a bit of a wait, but yeah, let me just pull that up. You can go to the next question.
That's awesome. Thank you for digging into that for us. So just as you're kind of typing, the next question is about jumping on the TikTok bandwagon with short media content for social media sites. So thoughts on TikTok and how you might incorporate that, or should you incorporate that into your other social media plans?
Yeah, TikTok is a really fun platform and I think has a huge potential. So the benefit of TikTok that's kind of well known is that there's not really, the algorithm isn't based on your clout. It's not based on, if you have a beautiful feed or if you're an influencer. Anyone can become famous on TikTok in theory if you have creative content because the algorithm picks up on how long people are watching videos, if they're swiping, and the chances of you showing up on someone's explore page are a lot higher than they are on Instagram. That's the main benefit of TikTok. And if you have the capacity and the content ideas for something to work on TikTok, I would highly recommend it. And again, it's something you can have fun with because if you have a video that doesn't do really well, all it takes is that one video that does hit it off and you can get a lot of traction for your brand. And I don't have a lot of experience with that myself for my podcast or music. I've had like random videos on my personal TikTok that have gone up there in views, but it's an interesting one because I think for brands, sometimes it doesn't make sense to be on TikTok and it can be awkward and too salesy and those videos won't do good. But if you're an artist, TikTok originally was a music app. So if you are posting your covers or if you have a creative way to promote a single or something like that, it can be really useful. But it's not necessarily for, it's not necessarily for like a banking company or the Red Cross or blood services, like there's some brands that don't really fit on there. So I would play it by ear, but also don't be afraid to try it out.
Great, thanks for sharing that insight into TikTok. We got two other questions so far, and then we'll kind of put another call out just to make sure that we haven't missed any. One is about third-party printing and how a person would go about connecting to these sites. Are you familiar with that at all?
I don't think I am, no. Third-party
Okay,
printing, no.
no
Sorry
worries.
about that.
And we have one other question around how do you go about kind of learning the ropes of the podcast world without necessarily launching a podcast? Do you go through the Alberta Podcast Network, or is there some other way you can kind of learn about it, get your feet wet before you actually launch your personal podcast?
Yeah, so there's a couple resources that I used. When I first started, I just bought a podcasting mic on Amazon, and I kind of planned out who I wanted to talk to for my show's premise. So I had the premise ready. I knew what each episode would be like in theory. And then I went ahead and got the equipment and tested it out. And it was just me and my computer and my guest. And then I had to learn to chop and edit all the audio, which took me forever. And that was kind of similar to social media. I just kind of got my feet wet. I just had to go and take that first step. And now, fast forward 3 years later, I'm part of the Alberta Podcast Network. And just as a note, you do have to have a podcast that's live to be on the network first. So it's kind of a way to help boost something that's already out there. And since then, I've also shifted my podcast episodes to be recorded in a studio that I do here in Calgary. And I got my ad agency that I work for to help with my branding, and I just really elevated the show as time went on. But I think it all starts with those small steps. So even if you have yourself a mic and a premise, I would say just roll with it. And just practically speaking, at first I just hosted my podcast on SoundCloud, and I would just post the links on my Facebook every week when there would be a new episode out, and people would listen that way. And then I discovered something like SoundCloud, you actually can distribute on all the other podcast mediums by just using their RSS link, which is created when you create a SoundCloud account, which is free, up to a certain amount of hours that you want to host. So once you have that RSS link wherever you're hosting your podcasts, you can paste it into Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, and it automatically updates every time there's a new episode. So it's pretty, like, there's parts of having a podcast that are quite easy, especially getting started. And then as time goes on, you kind of learn things and grow from there.
Great. Thanks for sharing that experience in terms of how you entered your journey and how it kind of evolved. We have another question in the chat, wondering if you have any experience with Telegram.
I am familiar with Telegram. I haven't been very active on it, but from what I've heard, it can be a powerful tool as well. Yeah, from what I've heard, it's a really good way to bring certain groups together around a subject or create a discussion panel. And I think that can be really useful. I actually haven't used it for my podcast or personal projects, but I know that it's definitely taking off, and a lot of people join Telegram groups to continue discussions. So I don't have anything bad to say about it, but I don't have a lot of experience with it.
No worries, and thanks for sharing. I didn't even know about it, so I'm glad someone out there was able to speak to it a little bit. I will put one kind of final call out for questions, and as we just kind of watch the chat box and the Q&A, I do just want to say thank you very much. You've brought a wealth of experience and information to this webinar that really helped make, moving to this online world a little bit easier for those who are just venturing in to that social media platform and figuring out how you get started and what to think about, and some of those simple lessons to take away when you start. So we do really value and appreciate that experience that you brought to this. It definitely grounded all of us in kind of where to go and how to get started. I have one other question in the QA, but it's just about getting the link to Telegram. So we'll pop that into the chat box in a moment. But I don't see any other questions. So I do, again, thank you so much, Josiah, for being here with us and for sharing. Hold on, a bunch just jumped in here. How do you recommend gaining followers in the beginning? Do you recommend following people randomly, or, how do you start that interest, I guess is the question.
If a good way to do it organically is by doing that actually. So if you go on similar pages, for example, my podcast, I assume that people that would enjoy my podcast might also be following CBC podcasts or something to do with Alberta culture. And so you can even just go to those pages and follow some of the people that follow them and kind of start to build traction in that way. For something like Twitter, you can comment on discussions and create a voice for yourself. And similar on Instagram, if you're commenting on posts, finding things that fall into that niche, that's a really good way to get followers. But yeah, don't be ashamed of following a bunch of people and seeing who follows back, as long as they're not random. And as long as you're kind of doing your research and spending time to kind of figure out who would be someone that would want to pay attention to you, that's not a bad strategy at all. And then other things like hashtags, doing giveaways are really good ways to gain followers as well.
Yeah. And the last question down here is kind of a little bit more future focused, and it's about any new platforms that might be coming down the pipe that you might be moving into or starting to utilize more than you have in the past.
Yeah, there's so many new platforms that are coming out all the time. And one that's picking up really quickly right now is an app called Clubhouse. And I am planning to use that for my podcast in the future. It's basically an audio only chat room. So you create a room that's based on a subject and anyone can come listen in, and you can pull people on stage to have a live discussion, and it's like a phone call. So it's a really interesting app, and I'm just getting my feet warmed up in it, but I am debating kind of doing a post-episode chats on Clubhouse, which is kind of a fun new platform that's coming out and I think is picking up a lot of traction. And then that's kind of a big one right now. I think you could really expand your reach. There's obviously, you can do stuff on Snapchat as a brand. You can do YouTube ads. You can, utilize Instagram and Facebook in so many different ways. There's a tool on Facebook to just get people to fill out a form for your email list. And yeah, almost every platform you can think of has an opportunity to be monetized or used to promote your brand. The newest up and coming one I would say is Clubhouse. And then I think the three, depending on what industry you're in, that you should kind of stay focused on would be the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter spaces. And then from there, you can expand to things like Telegram or Clubhouse or whatever fits what you're trying to do.
Yeah. But kind of start with the big three and then figure out what the new different ones how they might fit into your plans and how you want to be present on social media. No, that's very helpful.
Yeah, exactly. And if you find that one of those platforms works really well for you and is more easy to use, you can even start there. But it's important as a brand or a company, I think, to be on those three big ones.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much. We are kind of coming to the last little bit of minute or so of our webinar. So again, I do want to thank you for your time, for your expertise, for your experience that you shared with us today. I do want to also mention to all of our participants on this webinar, our attendees, that when we close this out, a quick evaluation will pop up. We would love to get your feedback on how this went for you. Did you gain the insights you were hoping to? Any comments you'd like to share with us? It also helps us improve what we're doing. I mean, feedback is invaluable in anything that we do. So once we end this webinar, you'll see that pop up. So please, if you have a moment, take the time to do that. Otherwise, thank you for joining us on this early January 4th day right after the holidays. We appreciate having you here. I think we had up to 111 people joining us today, which is wonderful to see. And if you haven't already registered, our next webinar is on January 6th. And it's kind of focused on how do you move some of your programming online. So maybe a little bit less about individual artists and more about taking a whole chunk of programming and figuring out how you can go from in-person delivery to online. And our guest speaker at that one will be from the Citadel Theatre in Edmonton. So we look forward to seeing all of you, and we want to say good night and have a wonderful evening. And again, Josiah, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.